Good, good. Okay, Kevin, we're going to start. Yeah. Anyone have any hands?
There should be almost enough. There are 25, 26. Great, okay. Divine Mother. So I said that as soon as my doctorate was completed, I would come home. And that actually happened. I actually kept my word. So I am grateful to be home in Yerushalayim, in the presence of my Ima and so many friends, and old friends and new friends. Okay, so dramatic title, correct? I was taught that the most important thing are titles. The rest, not so much. Okay. Mystical cross-gender practices, where do all the women go? The question I want to look at this evening is the following, is really the women's role in cemetery rituals, where they were and where they are. I will say, in parentheses, where they are in general. It's not to say that today you can't find women in a cemetery offering a eulogy. Nonetheless, I have to say that in most cemeteries in Israel, for sure, it's still hard to create a reality in which a woman feels comfortable in a cemetery. I was grateful to find out that the Chevra Kadisha, one of the Chevra Kadisha guys in the cemetery in Kiryat Gat, said to one of the rabbis who was officiating a funeral, "Ma, אתה לא מכיר את הסוד? You don't know the secret?" So the secret is that if a woman wants to say Kaddish, if a man starts with her, then shuts up, they won't shut her up. So that is the known secret, to start together, and then the man silences himself, and then the woman continues. So I'm happy to know that at least it's starting to be a known secret. There's a recognition and a cognition of what that means. Nonetheless, what I want to do is I want to walk through one particular halacha as it appears in the Shulchan Aruch, as really the time in our history that we can pinpoint when women were moved from the cemetery, and then to ask, why did that happen? In other words, why did Rabbi Yosef Karo have a need to remove the women from the cemetery? And I do want to say, maybe I'm jumping the gun, but it's also interesting to hold in our mind the reality in which the impact of mystical traditions from Tzfat of the 16th century and how they have made their way into our life. And one could really ask the question, especially in regard to our topic about women's participations in burial rituals, was that ever the intention? Is the reality that we are living, was that ever Rabbi Yosef Karo's intention? And had the Shulchan Aruch not gained the volume and the authority that it subsequently has impacted the way we paskin in the Ashkenazi world, in the modern Ashkenazi world, had that not happened, would have the reality of what women's participation in cemeteries today in burial rituals looks like. So I do also want to take that into consideration when thinking about how one's halachic authority can implicate generations to come, when perhaps, and here I'm doing kaf school for 2 seconds, when perhaps that really wasn't Rabbi Yosef Karo's initial agenda, right? Okay, so I want to put that into context as we're starting out. Until Rabbi Yosef Karo, I want you to know that until Rabbi Yosef Karo, there wasn't a question as to the role of women in cemeteries, right? The Gemara, both Babli and the Yerushalmi, Sanhedrin, for example, right, will ask the question whether women walk before or after the bier. Never the question of whether they go or not, as if actually completely clear. I want to say even more than that. When the Mishnah says, "En puchatin la'ani b'Yisrael mishne chalilim u'mekonenet," meaning to say, we have a tradition of female lamenters, mekonenot. If you read Dr. Meir Bar-Ilan's book on Sefer, on Echa, he will even talk about the fact that each one of the chapters was written by different dumuyot, different images, different people. Some of them were female mekonenot. So we have a profession of mekonenot, women that were lamenters, personal laments that were written about the moment that was happening when the dead were being escorted from their home. I want to say this tradition continued in Edot HaMizrach until coming to Israel. So until the Aliyah of Neshot Teiman, the Keilat Teimanit, the Yemenite community, women were still lamenting, and in the beginning still here, and then the sociological constraints of what fitting in looked like and didn't look like and so on changed the orientation of even their practices. But it was a practice that in some communities continued till this day. It's perhaps, and there is an opinion that even will go as far as saying, when the Mishnah says, "En pochati la'ani b'Yisrael shnei chalim u'mekonenet," you have to have flautists and lamenters, but even the mechalelim were women. That there's something about exiting life, bringing life into the world, and escorting life out of the world, which is really a woman's world. I want to say, I just want to remind us also as well that in the Gemara, for example, the vaginal canal is called kever. A womb is a kever, ptichat kever, right? A woman's womb is called a grave. A closed, enclosed, encapsulated cavity that contains body, alive, not alive, in this world, not in this world. And the same phrase for grave as for womb. Okay. So here I want us to go straight into the Torat and the Shulchan Aruch. Now, as you can see in front of you, I brought you the title of the section in the Tool about escorting the dead, and the section in the Shulchan Aruch about escorting the dead. And you can see that there's one word that's highlighted in both titles, and they're not the same word. Okay, so where in the Tool, the Yored De'ashim Nuntet, the name of the section is Eze Makom Yitziat Hanashim Ve'Havelim. From where do the women and the mourners leave? Right? How do they walk the procession to the cemetery? By the time we get to the Shulchan Aruch, Makom Yitziat Hamet Ve'Havelim. The women are non-existent. Actually, they were killed. They're dead. Now, before, the dead didn't go to the funeral, just the women and the mourners. And now, no women, the dead, and the mourners. Okay, so you see by the titles. Now, there are different opinions as to who was responsible for the titles. You can imagine that right now I want to stand here as a strong supporter of Meir Benayahu that actually highlights Rabbi Yosef Karo's responsibility to the titles of the Shulchan Aruch, and therefore, if there is a discrepancy between the Tool and the Shulchan Aruch, it's an intentional act, an intentional editing of Rabbi Yosef Karo. Now, I want you to see the Tool says the following. מקום שנהגו נשים לצאת לפני המיטה יוצאות, מקום שנהגו להיות אבלים הולכים לפני המיטה הולכים. No question in the Tool that women go to the cemetery. Its only question is, right, did they walk before or did they walk after? Makom nahagu. The question was always about the local tradition. When we get to the Shulchan Aruch, it says the following. מקום שנהגו לצאת נשים לפני המיטה יוצאות, מקום שנהגו לצאת לאחר המיטה יוצאות. Okay, familiar, right? They, based on what the tradition is. ועכשיו נהגו שאין לשנות, אין יוצאות אלא לאחר המיטה ואין לשנות. Now the tradition is behind the dead. And then it says, in סעיף קטן ב', יש למנוע מלצאת נשים לבית הקברות אחר המיטה. No more women. No more women. Okay. If you look in the Beit Yosef on the tour, he says the following. Okay, so this is Rabbi Yosef Karo's gloss on the tool. He says, where it says women go to the cemetery, the only question is whether before or after the death. He says the following. In the book of the Zohar, the portion of Parshat Vayakeh, it says that women should be prevented from going out to the cemetery For if they go out, they cause harm to the world, and it is appropriate to prevent them. Okay, he uses the Zohar, Vayake, to make a statement saying, it's true, the Gemara, no question, for sure women go. Zohar, Vayake, women don't go. Okay, now, this is when sometimes being an academic and frum create a chapter in your dissertation. Because versus Achronim that said, because it doesn't say that in the Zohar, which you're going to see in a moment. So there are some Achronim that say, Rabbi Dr. made a mistake. There are some Achronim that say, we don't paskin according to the Zohar. And there are, thank God, a lot of people that wrote their doctorates on the influence of the Zohar on Psika and so on. And here I say, Rabbi Yosef Karo did not make a mistake. What is he telling us, though? What happens in Zohar Vayake that would cause him to say women don't go to the cemetery? Especially when you open Zohar Vayake, which is what you have a translation of, and you see that in Zohar Vayake, it actually starts with the men and the women bringing offerings to the Mishkan. And there's a continuous process of women's participation throughout the examples that the Zohar Vayake brings. So I say to myself, that's not what it's about. So what is it about? So I found a motif that repeats itself throughout the Zohar Vayake, which I think is what we are dealing with here. And that is the motif of crying. That repeats itself. Rabbi Eliezer weeps, then God, and then brings the three categories that weep every night. God roars and weeps. And then Rashbi says, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai says, I want you to know that Malach HaMavet is going to be present in the next week or so, right? Having his summer vacation in our community. And when people come back from the cemetery, right, he walks with the women. Okay, so I say to myself, if women were not supposed to be in the cemetery, when Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai says to his son Rabbi Eliezer, women are going to be, the Malach HaMavet, the angel of death, is going to be here among the women, you be careful. The response actually should have been when Rabbi Eliezer says, what should we do? Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai says, you be careful. The response actually should have been, Malach HaMavet is walking around among the women, therefore, the women shouldn't go. Right? If there are men and women that have to bury the dead, and Malach HaMavet is among the women, then the best way to deal with the situation is to say, women shouldn't go. And then Malach HaMavet, as we'll see, doesn't have his minion. If you look through the sources, you'll see 7 women, Malach HaMavet among 7 women can cause damage. Malach HaMavet among 10 women, i.e. a minyan of women, he can demand, God forbid, the death of a person. Right? There's power in a quorum of 10 women. There's never a statement here whatsoever throughout the whole Zohar Vayake in which the women are told not to be at the cemetery. On the contrary, the men hide, the students hide, as if they buried themselves alive for 3 days. So I asked myself, in this Zohar Vayake, okay, on the one hand, Adrabah, women are completely included in bringing offerings to the Mishkan. Women were never questioned whether they should or shouldn't go to the cemetery. Clearly, they should go to the cemetery. Powerful. They have now partnered, in the Torah, women are partnered with men. And in the Zohar, women are partnered with the angel of death. It's a different kind of coupling and a different kind of structure of society. Okay, so then I asked myself, what am I going to do with this? And what is this really about? And what is Rabbi Yosef Karo really pointing to when referring to Zohar Vayake? Because remember, my Frumkai tells me that he wasn't making a mistake. So I started thinking about the role of the makonenot on the one hand, the female lamenters on the one hand, and I started thinking about Rabbi Yosef Karo, who is both a mystic and a halachic authority. And I started thinking about the cemetery and what happens in the cemetery, and the fact that in the Zohar Vayakel, women are participants on the one hand, and on the other hand, you have these crybabies. You have these men that are crying all the time. So why are the men crying in Zohar Vayakel? Why are the women going to the cemetery? And what is Rabbi Yosef Karo doing here as both a mystic and a halachist? And the way I want to put these pieces together is in the following way. I think what Rabbi Yosef Karo is saying is the following. He's saying the Mekonanot is an institution, right? Ironically, he's reading as metaphor. They're not physical women, they are an institution of lamenters. Now, I want you to think for a moment, with a halachic mind, what happens to men at a cemetery? What are the prohibitions on men in a cemetery? No tefillin, no tzitzit, no sefer Torah. So really what happens in the cemetery is they become women. You got it. Excellent. There is a process of effeminization in the cemetery of the men. The men become women. They are stripped of what is called, Professor Yishai Rosenzi calls it tachshitei gvarim, men's jewels, adornment. So men are stripped of those elements that identify them as men. No Torah, no tefillin, no tzitzit. They become women. Okay. Now, I want you to think about Rabbi Yosef Karo as a mystic and as a Talmudist. Rabbi Yosef Karo, in order to be a complete and whole person, he needs to find a way to engage the totality of his being, both as a mystic and as a halachist. As a halachist, he has a Beit Midrash. There's one place in the world where he actually can't learn, and that's the cemetery, where he becomes female. But what the cemetery becomes is his mystical Beit Midrash. Because crying, right, that's what we have in the Zohar Vayakel, is these men crying. Because in the mystical traditions, crying is a mystical technique of Aliyat HaNeshama. The soul ascends through the crying. You have an example of it in the Gemara with Rabbi Chanina ben Dosa. You have it with Ben Dordaya. Sam Rosho ben Birkav ve'ga'av v'yat'a nishmato. Right? He puts his eyes between his knees and his soul leaves. His soul ascends. So the technique of crying is, and this technique of Sam Rosho ben Birkav, to put your eyes in between your legs. Now I want you to know, like for mystics, a woman's body has two sets of lips. Her sfatayim elyonot and her sfatayim tachtonot. Her upper lips and her lower lips. Which is why, for example, the Mishnah in Ketubot will say, Lo mipia anu chayim. We don't live from her mouth. So women, a woman's body, a female body has two sets of lips in the role of the mystics, and a male body has two sets of eyes, the upper eyes and the lower eyes. And when you practice this practice of Sam Rosho ben Birkav ubacha, putting his eyes between his knees and crying, you see that there is a unification of the upper and the lower eyes. I would like to also suggest figuratively, that is the way a man creates an external womb. Because what happens in this moment of connecting these eyes and these eyes is there's an external cavity. There is figuratively an external womb that is created. So therefore, I say to myself, what happened with Rabbi Yosef Karo? In the Bet Midrash is where he learned. The one place where he can't learn is a cemetery. But the cemetery is the place to practice the technique of crying as a technique for Aliyat Neshama. Now you also understand, Aliyat Neshama, the ascent of the soul, is a form of death. It's a form in which your soul actually leaves your body for a moment. But where is he going to practice this? Well, we actually have an institution of Mekonenot. We have an institution, we have a paradigm in our tradition of crying. We have a Bet Midrash for crying. The Bet Midrash for crying is a cemetery. And the professionals for that technique are called Mekonenot. And what can you do that Mekonenot are also women? So that is why I'm saying, if you ask me lechatchila from the outset, did he really want to remove the women from the cemetery? My answer would be no. It wasn't about the women per se. It was about him, his desire and his need to appropriate the cemetery as his bet midrash for crying, as a mystical technique for Aliyat HaNeshama. I want to add one more piece to it, and then I will actually try to leave some time for some questions, is that Rabbi Dr. has a journal, a mystical journal, Manhig Meshari. And what this journal is there was a neshama, a divine feminine soul, who was his Mashpiah Ruchanit. He said it wasn't the first Mashpiah Ruchanit. There was a neshama, then she was documented. It's a soul, female voice, that spoke to Rabbi Yosef Kal and continuously told him what to do, what not to do. Okay, so I say to myself, thank you, Zor Vayakel. If I follow Zor Vayakel, the paradigm of crying, right? So he's telling me, actually, when he says in the Bet Yosef, Zor Vayakel, he's telling me the truth, but it's not what we thought it was. He's saying, yes, go to Zor Vayakel, but it's not about getting the women out of the cemetery. It's about crying as a mystical technique. I want to read you the following, if I can find it, because I actually marked it, so I should be able to find it. Okay. Okay. In his Magid Meshari, in his mystical journal, when she tells him what to learn and what not to learn, and how much water to drink or not drink, and what to do and not do, on Parshat Vayakel, she says the following. This is my translation. Also, it said to me, if you can, crying during your prayers is good and pleasing. And at least on Mondays and Thursdays, the days you read Torah, you would remove the imprint of your face and ascend, Aliyat Neshama, crying while learning Torah, Aliyat Neshama. Also, it is said that it will help me complete my work with no mistakes or blemishes, and it will enlighten the eyes of all of Israel, Enei Yisrael. Now, when a mystic in the Zohar is able to complete what is called a yichud, he is known as Alma she'en la einayim, the divine feminine that has no eyes, because the feminine has now been incorporated into the masculine, and it loses its eyes. But a complete and whole mystic is one that can incorporate both its mystical feminine and its mystical masculine into one. So, when you complete your work, Ya'ir Einei Yisrael, which I want to say has this illusion of Alma she'en la einayim, and I should call it the Bet Yosef. I want to remind you that the Mishnah tells us in the opening of Masechet Yoma, Ishto zo beito, the Bet Yosef. For it is my home in this world and in the world to come. The physical world and the mystical world. For the mystic, the physical body is a vessel. It's not the totality of one's identity. So therefore, for Rabbi Yosef Karo, he knows that in order to be a complete and whole mystic, he needs to find a way to incorporate the masculine and the feminine within him. He also knows that there is this technique of aliyat neshama, a descending of the soul, that happens through the crying. And then he incorporates the cemetery as his bet midrash for perfecting this practice. And we wouldn't have known of all of this, and to a certain extent, had the Shulchan Aruch not become what it became. That's the reality of it. It would have been a mystical practice in Tzfat of the 16th century, in the time of Rabbi Yosef Karo, in which the women of Tzfat were removed from the cemetery, so Rabbi Yosef Karo could perfect this mystical technique. Being that the authority of the Shulchan Aruch became what it became, we now have a situation in which women have been removed from cemeteries, even though lechatchila, I believe, it really was never the intention. Questions, comments, thoughts, clarifications?
5 minutes for that.
Yeah, please, Howie.
Just one thing I was popping in my mind as you're speaking was that the Rabbinical students, one of the main practices that we believe is to go to the cemeteries and prostrate themselves on graves. And that's where the spiritual work is happening.
Yes, because it's really like Harry Potter. It's like a key. A port key, yes. Yes, it's a port key. Graves are a port key. Because you enter in on this side and you come out on the other side.
And I'm thinking about what you spoke about earlier, just we describe as the woman's body's connection to that transition between birth and life and not life, and sending them to cemeteries to pray, maybe brings them in touch with that idea.
Yes, yes.
So thank God over the last few decades we've become more in touch with the feminine dimension of God as a great tikkun, and to harness that energy. But I'm having trouble formulating masculinity as in the 21st century in a positive way for young men. What are the positive masculine dimensions of God that you think we should highlight?
Silence as a form of strength. Right? Because what I'm asking is, like, I'm not asking to silence men, God forbid, really not. I'm also aware of what you're talking about, and so therefore I will say something which isn't often popular. I think that the fact that women are in shul as much as they are is a problem for the men, because men now do not have a built-in men's club in the positive way, right? It used to be that at least morning minyan, at least that, and it's not, right? And a couple of years ago, one Shabbat morning, I was invited to the men's club to the Kiddush club. Okay, I made it in my life to be invited to the Kiddush club during Haftarah, and I said no, because it was my responsibility to make sure that they had their space. I wanted that drink, but okay. So I want to say, so that's why the first thing that comes to my mind is silence as a form of strength, of cultivating an inner voice and conquering an inner voice and cultivating a way in which that passivity is actually active. Right? It's, if I can come back to some of these images. It's like, how do we actually create an internal womb? How do we create a space in which their creation is an internal creation versus going out and maximizing in that way? So I think it would be a different way of thinking. Please.
Is there any parallel that occurred to me when there's a Catholic feeling in the tzitzit Beit Shiur?
Yes, which is why when I'm completely facetious, and you see the abbreviation in a halachic book, the abbreviation for Bet HaKnesset and Bet HaKisei are the same. I'm serious. It's true. I'm like serious, but okay. But I want to say here. So this is what the Ma'oli 9 will tell you. The Ma'oli 9 will tell you that when we eat, there are two components to our food. There's the material element of our food, and there's the flavor, the taste, which is the spiritual element of our food. And when we go to Beit HaKiseh, what we're left with is executing from our body the physical, dead element of the food. And what we've incorporated into our bodies, into our souls, is the flavor and the taste and the pleasure, and the vitality of what the food has to offer. And what we excrete out of our body is the dead element, the dead part of the food. So I would say that also is a way of thinking about places of life and death where we do and don't have talid tefillin, sechel tov.